The town of Redemption Creek was dying of thirst, but the only water belonged to a devil. The cattle baron Conrad Shaw owned the land, the law, and every drop of water in the valley, and he was squeezing the life out of the townsfolk, one soul at a time. His enforcer was a man-mountain known as Goliath, a giant cowboy who knew only loyalty and brutality. The only thing standing between Shaw and total control wasn't a sheriff or a gunslinger. It was the preacher's innocent daughter. And she was about to find out that faith is no shield against a man who has none. The dust in Redemption Creek had a life of its own. It was a fine, reddish powder that coated everything: the warped boards of the general store, the empty troughs outside the saloon, and the cracked leather of the Bibles in Preacher Adam Parsons' small, struggling church. The town wasn't just dry, it was being bled. The source of the bleeding was a man named Conrad Shaw. Shaw had arrived 5 years prior, buying up the land around the valley's only reliable water source, the Serpent River. Now, with the territory in the grip of a 2-year drought, his control was absolute. He sold water by the barrel at prices that bankrupted good families, taking their deeds and their livestock as payment. Enforcing his will was a man who seemed carved from the hostile landscape itself. His name was Luke Harding, but no one called him that. They called him Goliath. Luke was a giant, standing a head taller than any man in the county, with shoulders as broad as an ox yoke. His presence was an event. When he rode his massive black stallion down the town's single street, women pulled their children inside, and men found urgent business elsewhere. He wasn't just Shaw's foreman. He was his judgment. Eliza Parsons, the preacher's daughter, watched him from the window of the parsonage. She was 19, and in a town defined by grit and despair, she was a stark contrast. With fair skin, kept safe from the sun by a worn bonnet, and deep blue eyes that still held a spark of misplaced hope, she was seen by the townsfolk as something to be protected, a symbol of the purity they had all lost. She was as the saloon girls whispered, with a mix of mockery and envy, the preacher's virgin daughter. But Eliza was not made of glass. She had a spine of prairie steel forged by watching her father's congregation dwindle and his spirit break under the weight of Shaw's thumb. "You shouldn't stare, Eliza," her father, Preacher Adam, murmured from his desk. He was a thin, haunted-looking man, his black coat perpetually dusted with the red powder of the street. "That man, he is a vessel of wrath." "He's just a man, father," Eliza replied, her voice soft but firm. "And he's riding toward the Miller farm." Her father's face tightened. "Robert Miller. He hasn't been to service in a month. He told me he couldn't spare the tithe." "He can't spare the water, father," Eliza corrected gently. "Shaw doubled the price last week." She watched Luke, Goliath Harding, dismount his heavy frame, moving with a surprising predatory grace. He wasn't alone. 2 of Shaw's other hired guns, rowdy men named Frank and Walt, flanked him. They stopped at the Miller's broken gate. Robert Miller, a farmer whose strength had been baked out of him by the sun, came out onto his porch, his wife Hannah clutching his arm. Eliza felt a familiar, cold knot in her stomach. It was the dread of the inevitable. Luke Harding didn't shout. He never did. He spoke in a low, gravelly rumble that carried farther than any yell. Eliza couldn't hear the words, but she saw Robert Miller shake his head, his hands held up in a plea. She saw Hannah Miller begin to weep. Then, the terrible, methodical work began. Luke nodded to his men. Frank and Walt strode past the Millers and began to unlatch the small corral. The Millers' 2 thin cows and a single mule were all they had left. "No! Please!" Robert Miller's cry was thin in the dry air. He lunged at Walt. It was over in an instant. Luke Harding didn't even turn his whole body. He simply extended an arm, his hand enveloping Robert's shoulder, and shoved. The farmer was thrown back against his own porch, collapsing in a heap. Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Eliza, come away from the window!" Her father pleaded, his voice cracking. But she couldn't. She watched as Luke himself opened the trough and let the last of the miller's precious water drain into the dust. He then mounted his horse, the seized livestock tied behind him, and looked back at the ruined family. He tipped his hat not in respect, but in finality. As Luke and his men rode back toward the main street, his gaze swept the town. For a second, his eyes met Eliza's through the parsonage window. There was no malice in them, no anger, just a vast, chilling emptiness, as blank and unforgiving as the desert sky. Eliza didn't look away. She held his gaze until he passed her heart, pounding, not just with fear, but with a sudden, blazing hatred that felt dangerously close to a sin. She turned to her father, who was staring at his hands. "You must preach against him, Father," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You must tell the town that Shaw is a plague, a thief." "Hush, child," Adam said, his eyes squeezed shut. "You don't understand the ways of the world. To speak against Shaw is to speak against the man who owns the bread we eat, the very land this church sits on." Eliza stared at him, a new, colder fear creeping into her. "What do you mean this is God's land?" "It's Conrad Shaw's land, Eliza," Adam said, his voice barely audible. "We are here by his good grace, and his grace," he added, looking toward the window where Luke Harding had been, "is running out." The next few days were a quiet torment. The Millers were gone by morning, their wagon loaded with what little the dust hadn't claimed. They were headed for the Arizona Territory, or perhaps just to die in the wilderness. Their departure left a hole in the community, a fresh wound that festered in the heat. Deputy Ben Carter, the town's only semblance of law, had watched it all. Ben was a young man, barely older than Eliza, and he wore his tin star like a burden. He was hopelessly outgunned by Shaw's men and hamstrung by a sheriff who lived in the county seat 50 miles away and was rumored to be on Shaw's payroll. Eliza found Ben outside the dry goods store, staring at the dust-caked notice board. "They just left," Eliza said, her voice low. "Hannah Miller didn't even have a hat for the sun. I gave her mine." Ben kicked at the dirt. "And what was I supposed to do? Eliza Harding was within the law." Miller signed a water contract. The contract states that default on payment results in seizure of assets. It's all legal. Legal? Eliza's voice rose, attracting the attention of a few listless prospectors. Since when is cruelty legal? Since when is starvation legal? You wear a badge, Ben? It's supposed to mean something. Ben's face flushed. It means I stop drunks from shooting each other in the saloon. It means I lock up horse thieves. It doesn't mean I can take on Conrad Shaw and his private army. You want me to get myself killed? Is that what your God wants? The barb hit its mark. Eliza flinched. My God wants justice. He wants compassion, neither of which were on display yesterday. Then maybe your God should send some rain. Ben snapped, and immediately regretted it. Eliza, I'm sorry. I'm one man. Harding is... He's not human. He is human, Ben, Eliza insisted. That's the problem. I saw his eyes. He's a man, which means he has a soul. And souls can be saved. Ben let out a bitter laugh. You save his soul, Eliza. I'll just try and stay out of his way. He turned and walked back to his small office, the jingle of his spurs sounding defeated. Eliza, however, felt a strange resolve settle over her. If the law wouldn't act and her father couldn't act, then she would. Her chance came 2 days later. It was hotter than usual, a baking, breathless heat that promised a storm that never came. Eliza was helping distribute what little the church had in its charity stores, mostly dried beans and flour, when Luke Harding rode into town. He was alone this time, which was unusual. He dismounted in front of the saloon, his sheer size drawing the usual fearful silence. He went inside. Eliza watched her heart thumping. This was it. She ignored the worried whispers of the women she'd been helping. She crossed the street, her worn boots making no sound in the thick dust. She could feel the eyes of the entire town on her back. The preacher's daughter walking into the Last Chance saloon. She pushed open the bat-wing doors. The saloon was dark and smelled of stale whiskey and sweat. The piano was silent. The saloon girls frozen at their tables. The bartender, a man named Pete, looked like he'd seen a ghost. And there at the bar was Luke Harding. He had a bottle of whiskey and a small, dirty glass. He was staring at his own reflection in the mirror behind the bar. "Mr. Harding." Her voice sounded impossibly small. Luke Harding went still. Every man in the room held his breath. He turned not with the quickness of a gunslinger, but with the slow, deliberate motion of a mountain turning. He looked down at her. His eyes up close were a startlingly pale grey, webbed with exhaustion. "You're in the wrong place, girl," he rumbled. I am Eliza Parsons, Preacher Adam's daughter. I know who you are." He turned back to his drink. "Get out. What you did to the Millers was wrong," she said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. A low, dangerous chuckle rumbled in his chest. "Wrong, it was a contract. They didn't pay. I collected. That's business." "That was theft," Eliza said, taking a step closer. The men at the poker table were slowly, quietly sliding their chairs back. "You left them with nothing." Luke filled his glass and drank the whiskey in one gulp, his throat bobbing. He slammed the glass down, and the sound made her jump. "Nothing," he said, his voice dropping. "They had their lives. They had each other. That's a hell of a lot more than nothing." He turned to face her fully. "You live in a house of prayer, little girl. You read your good book and you sing your hymns and you think you know what wrong is. You know nothing. I know that God does not abide a thief," she said, lifting her chin. "And your God doesn't abide a fool," he countered. "And you're being a fool right now. You think your father's little white church protects you? You think that cross you wear stops a bullet?" "I think," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "that there is a conscience inside you. Mr. Shaw, he cannot own that." For a long second, Luke Harding just stared at her. The emptiness she had seen through the window was still there, but now she saw something else behind it. A flicker of something. A deep, agonizing pain. It was there and gone so fast, she thought she'd imagined it. He leaned in his shadow, covering her completely. He smelled of horse leather and whiskey. "Go home, Eliza Parsons," he whispered, and his voice was not threatening, but something far more frightening. It was a warning. "You keep pushing. You keep scratching at things you don't understand. You're going to find a snake and it will bite you. And your father, he won't be able to save you." He turned back to his bottle. Eliza stood frozen for a moment. She hadn't saved him. She hadn't even cracked his armor. But she had seen something. A chink. A flicker of the man inside the Goliath. She turned and walked out of the saloon, her head held high. She had poked the bear. And now she knew the bear was awake. The confrontation in the saloon changed the air in Redemption Creek. It was no longer a town simmering in quiet despair. It was a town holding its breath. Eliza's act of defiance had been either incredibly brave or suicidally foolish. The consensus was the latter. Her father was terrified. "Eliza, what were you thinking?" he demanded, his hands shaking as he paced the small parsonage. "To go in there. To him. Do you know what he could have done?" "He did nothing, Father. He just talked. He is Shaw's right hand, the hand that strangles this town, and you put your own neck in his grip. Why?" "Because someone had to," Eliza burst out, her patience snapping. "You won't Ben Carter, can't. You preach about David and Goliath every third Sunday, but when Goliath is standing right here in our street, you hide behind the altar and tell me to be quiet." The slap was so sudden, so unexpected, that it shocked them both into silence. Preacher Adam had never raised a hand to her in her life. His own hand trembled in the air, his face a mask of pale horror. Eliza's cheek stung, but it was her heart that broke. "Father, you don't know," Adam whispered, his eyes wide with a terrible cornered fear. He stumbled back and sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "You don't know what I've done." A cold dread settled over Eliza, worse than any fear she'd felt facing Luke Harding. "What do you mean, Father? What are you talking about?" He was weeping, his shoulders shaking. "This church, this land, I told you Shaw holds the deed. But I didn't tell you why." He explained the words, tumbling out in a torrent of guilt. Years ago, before Eliza's mother passed, she had been terribly ill. The doctor in the county seat required a sum of money Adam did not have. He had prayed, he had begged, and finally, in desperation, he had gone to the one man in the valley with money, Conrad Shaw. "He gave it to me," Adam choked out. "Alone. He was so kind. He said to pay it back when I could. But after your mother died, I couldn't. The interest grew. And then the drought came. Last year, he came to me. He said the debt was due." "So you gave him the church?" Eliza asked, her voice hollow. He didn't want the church," Adam said. "He wanted me." He explained the new bargain. Shaw would forget the debt, so long as Preacher Parsons used his pulpit, not just to preach the gospel, but to preach patience, to preach obedience, to tell the townsfolk that the drought was God's will, and that Mr. Shaw was a necessary steward. "He wants you to be his voice," Eliza said, horrified. "He's using you to keep the town quiet. He said if I refused, he would not only take the church and the parsonage, he would tell the whole town I had stolen from the collection plate to pay for my wife, that I was a gambler. He would ruin me, Eliza. Ruin us. We would be cast out. Like the Millers." Eliza sank onto the stool opposite him. The entire foundation of her life, her father's unshakable faith, the sanctity of their home, was a lie. It was all built on a bedrock of fear and a rich man's blackmail. "And now," Adam continued, his voice thin, "now Shaw he's asking for more. He wants the land. He told me last week he's tired of this charade. He wants me to close the church. He wants us gone." "Why?" Eliza asked. "It's just a small plot of dusty land. His ranch is thousands of acres." "I don't know," Adam wept. "But your performance in the saloon, it has angered him. He sent word this morning. He said my daughter's insolence has voided our agreement. He is sending Harding." Eliza stood up, the blood draining from her face. "Sending him where? When?" "Here," Adam whispered, looking around the small, comforting room, as if seeing it for the last time. "Tonight. To throw us out." Suddenly, Eliza understood Luke Harding's words in the saloon. "You're going to find a snake and it will bite you. And your father, he won't be able to save you. He hadn't been threatening her. He had been warning her. He knew this was coming. "No," Eliza said. The word was quiet, but it vibrated with a new, terrifying intensity. The steel in her spine was now tempered steel. She was no longer just the preacher's daughter. She was a woman defending her home. "Eliza, we must pack," her father said, rising on shaky legs. "No," she said again, louder. She walked to the fireplace and picked up the heavy iron poker. "Eliza, my child, what are you doing? You cannot fight that beast. He is a man, father," Eliza said, her knuckles white on the iron. "And you are a man of God. You are going to go into that church. You are going to get on your knees. And you are going to pray for the courage you've been lacking for 5 years. I will not let them take our home." She bolted the front door of the parsonage. It was a flimsy lock, but it was something. She looked at her father, his face crumpled in fear. "Go, father. Pray." He hesitated, then stumbled out the back door and across the small yard into the church sanctuary. Eliza stood in the center of the parsonage, the iron poker in her hand, and waited. The sun began to set, painting the small room in shades of blood red and deep purple. Every sound, the creak of the house, the whistle of the wind, made her jump. Then she heard it, the slow, heavy tread of boots on the porch, the jingle of spurs. A shadow fell across the door. Thump, thump, thump. A knock so powerful it shook the entire door frame. Eliza didn't answer. She just tightened her grip on the poker. "Preacher Parsons," Luke Harding's voice rumbled. It wasn't a question. It was a command. "By order of Conrad Shaw, you are to vacate these premises. The property has been foreclosed on." Silence. Thump, thump, thump. "Parsons, I know you're in there. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Eliza took a shaky breath. "Go away. This is God's house. You have no right." There was a long pause on the other side of the door. She could practically feel his surprise. "Miss Parsons." His voice was different, tighter. "The preacher. He didn't tell you. The deal is done. You have to leave. Now." "There is no deal," she cried, moving to stand beside the door. "There is only theft and blackmail. We will not leave." She heard him sigh. It was a sound of profound weariness. "Girl, I am trying to be patient. I gave you a warning. You didn't listen. Now open this door." "No. Open the door, or I will take it down. This is our home. You can't just—" Crack, the sound of his boot splintering the wood near the lock made her scream. He kicked it again, and the lock burst, the door flying open and slamming against the wall. And there he stood. Luke Goliath. Harding filled the doorway, his massive form silhouetted against the dying light. He looked like an avenging angel from a darker testament. His face was set in a mask of grim duty. He saw her and the iron poker in her hand. He didn't even acknowledge it. He just took a step inside. "Don't," Eliza said, her voice a desperate, trembling whisper. She raised the poker, but it was shaking so badly it was useless. He took another step, his eyes sweeping the room. "Where is the preacher?" "Get out," she said. "This is Shaw's property now. I'm here to clear it." He took another step, and she had to scramble backward. She was trapped between him and the back wall. Tears of pure, undiluted terror and rage streamed down her face. She was so small, and he was so impossibly large. He was inside. He was in her home. "Please," she begged, the word tearing from her throat. Don't come inside me. Don't come in here. This is our home. This is all we have." Luke Harding stopped. Her words hung in the air. "Don't come inside me." It was a raw, primal plea, a desperate, failed defense of the last sanctuary she had. He looked at her, his pale grey eyes finally losing their emptiness. He saw her terror. He saw the tears. He saw the pathetic, useless weapon in her hands. And for the first time, Luke Goliath. Harding looked ashamed. He hesitated, his gaze dropping from her face to the floor. He seemed for just a second to be at war with himself. The giant cowboy, the enforcer, the monster. He was faltering. But then his face hardened. He squeezed his eyes shut for a brief moment, as if shaking off a weakness. He looked back up at her, the mask of duty back in place. "I have a job to do," he said, his voice flat. He couldn't stop. He strode past her, ignoring the way she cringed against the wall. He began to pick up her father's books, his huge hands clumsy on the small volumes, and started carrying them to the door. Eliza slid to the floor, the poker clattering from her hand. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't harmed her. But he had violated her home. He had broken her spirit. He had heard her beg, and he had done it anyway. He couldn't stop. Or she realized with a chilling certainty he wouldn't. Luke Harding was methodical. He piled the preacher's books, clothes, and meager possessions on the porch with a strange, detached efficiency. He was not gentle, but he was not destructive. He was simply emptying. Eliza remained on the floor, a numb, cold spectator to the dismantling of her life. Her father, she realized, was still in the church. He had not come. He had left her to face the giant alone. The shame of that realization was almost as painful as the eviction. When the parsonage was empty, Luke turned to her. "It's done. You and the preacher need to be out of town by sunup. Mr. Shaw is generous. He's letting you keep your wagon." He then turned and strode across the yard to the church. He would empty that too. That's when the steel returned to Eliza. He had taken her home. He would not take God's. She scrambled to her feet and ran after him, bursting through the church doors. "No, you've taken our house. You will not touch this. This is a sanctuary." Luke was standing in the center aisle, his hat in his hands. It was the first time she had ever seen him uncovered. His hair was a dark, unruly brown, and his face in the dim light of the altar candles looked younger and profoundly weary. Her father was there, kneeling at the front pew, his head bowed, not moving. "Preacher," Luke said, his voice softer in the echoing space. "You need to go." Adam Parsons didn't respond. "Father, get up!" Eliza cried, running to him. "Don't let him do this." "It's over, Eliza," her father whispered, his voice dead. "It was over years ago." "This is a holy place, Mr. Harding," Eliza said, spinning to face Luke. "You will not desecrate it." "Desecrate?" Luke let out a short, harsh laugh. "Miss Parsons, I'm just here to board it up. Shaw's orders. He owns the land." "He owns nothing here." She seethed, planting herself between Luke and the altar. "This belongs to God, and the people of this town." "The people of this town are too scared to even be here," Luke said, taking a step toward her. "They left you both alone, just like he did." He nodded toward her father. Eliza flinched but held her ground. "Get out." "I have my orders," he said, reaching for her, his intention to simply move her aside as he had the furniture. "No," she yelled, and she slapped his hand away. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small church. Luke stopped staring at his hand, then at her. His face darkened. The brief flicker of humanity was gone, replaced by a cold rage. "That was a mistake, little girl." He grabbed her arm. His grip was like a steel trap. Eliza cried out in pain. "Let her go." The voice was new. Deputy Ben Carter stood in the doorway, his Colt revolver drawn and shaking in his hand. Luke turned his hand still clamped on Eliza's arm. He looked at Ben, then at the gun, and he smiled. It was a terrifying, mirthless expression. "Go home, deputy. This is private business. You're hurting her Harding. Let her go and get out of the church. This is an unlawful eviction." "Unlawful?" Luke laughed, pulling Eliza closer to him as a shield. "I have the deed in my pocket, signed by the preacher himself. Foreclosure, all legal, just like the Millers." "I don't care about the deed," Ben said, his voice gaining strength as he cocked the hammer. "You will unhand her and walk out of here, or I swear to God, Harding, I will shoot you where you stand." There was a long, terrible silence. The giant cowboy, the young lawman, and the preacher's daughter frozen in a tableau of Western justice. "You don't have the sand, boy," Luke sneered. "Try me." Luke studied him. He saw the desperation in Ben's eyes, the tremor in his hand. That wasn't just fear, it was killing rage. The boy would do it. He might miss, or he might only wound him, but he would pull the trigger. Slowly, contemptuously, Luke Harding released Eliza's arm. He shoved her toward Ben. "You've all just made a powerful enemy," Luke said, his voice a low growl. He placed his hat back on his head, pulling the brim low. "Sun up. Mr. Shaw won't be as patient as I've been." He turned and stalked out of the church, his spurs a departing metallic threat. Eliza collapsed against Ben, who quickly holstered his gun to catch her. Her father finally stood up. "You saved us, Ben," Eliza whispered, her entire body shaking. "For now," Ben said grimly. "He'll be back, and he'll bring Shaw's whole crew. We have to get you and your father out of here. Tonight." "No," Eliza said, pushing herself upright. "I'm not running. This is wrong. There has to be a way." "Eliza," her father said, his voice hollow. "He's right. It's over." "You said Shaw wants this land," Eliza said, her mind racing, the terror being replaced by a frantic, analytical clarity. "You said he wants the land, not just the church. Why is this one dusty plot so important?" "I don't know," Adam said. Where did you sign the papers?" Eliza asked. "Where did you meet with him?" "In his study," Adam said. "At the ranch?" "No," Ben said, seeing where her mind was going. "Absolutely not, Eliza. You can't go there. That's a fortress." "He won't be expecting it," Eliza said. "He thinks we're packing. He thinks we're beaten. But he's hiding something. The Millers, the church. It's all connected. I know it." "Eliza, this isn't a storybook," Ben pleaded. "This is real." "That's why I have to go," she said. She looked at the altar, at the large, leather-bound Bible her mother had given her. "The Lord helps those who help themselves, Ben. You're the law. You can't break into his ranch. But I'm just a citizen seeking redress." "Eliza, you said Harding has a deed in his pocket," she said, her eyes bright. "What if I can find the real one, or the original loan, something to prove the blackmail?" Before Ben could argue, she was already moving. "Keep my father safe. Lock yourselves in here. Bar the door. I won't be long." "How are you even going to get there? It's 5 miles. Eliza said, a grim smile touching her lips. "I'm going to borrow a horse." She slipped out the back of the church, her mind set. She knew where Luke Harding stabled his horse when he was in town, and she knew he had just left on foot, likely to the saloon to gather Shaw's other men. She was going to find the snake's nest, and she was going to use the snake's own ride to get there. Getting the horse was terrifyingly easy. Luke's massive black stallion, Beelzebub, as the stable hand called him, was tethered outside the saloon. The horse was as intimidating as its owner, but Eliza had grown up with animals. She approached him slowly, speaking in a low, calming murmur. Untying the reins, She pulled herself onto the saddle block and with a surge of adrenaline onto the stallion's back. No one noticed. The street was dark and the saloon was loud. She nudged the horse into a walk, then a trot taking the back alley out of town. She rode hard, the powerful animal beneath her, eating up the miles to Conrad Shaw's Serpent's Head Ranch. The ranch was dark save for a single brightly lit window on the second floor of the main house. The study. She tethered the stallion a quarter-mile out and approached on foot, moving through the shadows of the outbuildings. She was a preacher's daughter, and she was about to commit breaking and entering. She prayed for forgiveness and for luck. The house was built of stone and dark wood, a monument to Shaw's ego. A trellis covered in dead vines ran up the side of the house, right below the study's side window. It was a terrible risk. Clenching her jaw, Eliza hiked up her skirts and began to climb. Her hands were raw, and her knuckles were bleeding by the time she reached the window, which by some miracle was unlatched to let in the cool night air. She slipped inside her heart, hammering so loudly she was sure it would give her away. The study was magnificent, lined with books, a large oak desk and a roaring fireplace. It smelled of cigar smoke and leather. Conrad Shaw was not there. He was, she guessed, at the saloon with his men preparing to ride back to town and finish the eviction. She had minutes at best. She went to the desk. It was a sea of papers, ledgers, maps, contracts. She frantically searched for her father's name. She found it on a folded document, a mortgage deed just as he'd said. But beside it, another ledger. It was a water ledger. It detailed every family in the valley, their debts and their payments. But that wasn't the twist. The twist was a second set of numbers, written in a separate column. It was titled L.H. Debt. Eliza's blood ran cold. L.H. Luke Harding. It was a tally. Every time Luke collected a debt, every time he foreclosed on a farm, every time he brought in a tax, a portion of that money was being deducted from this L.H. debt. The total was astronomical. Luke Harding wasn't just Shaw's enforcer. He was his indentured servant. He was working off a debt. Then, at the bottom of a drawer, she found it. A small locked metal box. She used the fireplace poker, an eerie echo of her own, to jimmy the weak lock. Inside were not deeds. They were letters and a newspaper clipping. The clipping was old, from a Denver newspaper 8 years prior. It detailed a sensational murder trial. A young foreman, Luke Goliath Harding, had been accused of killing a prominent landowner in a bar brawl. The evidence was overwhelming. Harding claimed he was framed, that the landowner had attacked him first, but witnesses, all employees of the landowner, swore it was cold-blooded murder. Harding was facing the gallows. The letters were from a lawyer addressed to Conrad Shaw. They detailed the trial and the last-minute arrival of a new surprise witness, a traveling merchant who provided an alibi for Harding. The charges were dropped. The final letter was a simple, "I owe you." It wasn't for money. It was for a life. Signed, Luke Harding, a promise to repay Conrad Shaw for saving him from the hangman's noose. He didn't save him, Eliza whispered, her mind piecing it all together. She looked back at the first letter, the one from the lawyer. As per your instructions, the witness Mr. Peters has been paid and is on his way to California. He will not be heard from again. Your new foreman will be indebted to you for life. Conrad Shaw hadn't saved Luke Harding. He had framed him for the murder in the first place. He had manufactured the entire crisis, hired the false witnesses to convict him, and then saved him with his own paid-off witness at the last second. He hadn't saved a life. He had bought one. He had manufactured his own loyal, terrifying, Goliath, out of a good man, chained him with a life debt, and then set him upon the people of Redemption Creek. Every farm Luke seized, every family he ruined, he did so believing he was paying an honorable debt to the man who saved him from the gallows. The LH debt ledger wasn't Luke's. It was Shaw's accounting of how much profit he had squeezed from his investment. This was the snake. This was the evil at the heart of the valley. She grabbed the letters, the clipping, and the ledger, and then she heard it. Voices. From downstairs. "Stayed in the church. The deputy is with them," a man was saying. "Harding should have handled it. He's getting soft." Another voice replied. It was Conrad Shaw. He was home. Eliza's heart stopped. She ran to the window. As she looked out, she saw them. Not just Shaw, but 3 other men. And standing by the horses was Luke Harding himself. He had ridden back with them. She was trapped. "Search the house," Shaw's voice commanded from below. "The girl's not in the church. I just got word from Walt. Her and the preacher and the deputy are all holed up in there. But that giant horse of Harding's is gone. She stole it. She might be here." Eliza's blood turned to ice. She heard boots on the stairs. She looked around the study, frantic. There was no other exit. No wait. A small door half hidden by a bookshelf. A servant's passage. She darted inside, pulling the door shut, just as the study door opened. She was in a narrow, dark and dusty staircase. It led down. She descended as quietly as she could, her hand over her mouth to stifle her breathing. She emerged in the kitchen. It was empty. The front door was impossible. Shaw and his men were in the foyer, the back door. She slipped out into the night and ran, not for the stallion, but for the stables. She could hear shouting from the house. She was here. "The desk is a mess." She dived into the dark, sweet-smelling hay of the stable, burrowing deep, just as 2 of Shaw's men ran past. She waited, her body trembling, the stolen papers clutched to her chest. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. "Find her," Shaw's voice echoed across the yard. "And find Harding." Where did he go? Eliza held her breath. Where had Harding gone? He wasn't with the men searching. "I'm here, boss." Luke's low rumble came from right outside the stable. Eliza froze. "She was in my study," Shaw said, his voice clipped and furious. "She took the Denver papers. She took the ledger." There was a long, heavy silence. That was private. Luke said, his voice different, not threatening, confused. "It was business," Shaw snapped. "Now she knows. She knows how I acquired you. It's a complication. Find her, Luke. Find the preacher's daughter. And this time, no witnesses. No patience. You will silence her. Permanently." Another silence. Eliza could hear the wind in the eaves. She could hear her own heart. "Silence her," Luke repeated. "You mean, kill her? She's a thief who broke into my home. It's self-defense," Shaw said dismissively. "She knows everything, you fool. She knows I set up the Denver trial. She knows you're my puppet. She can ruin us. She can free you." "Free me?" Luke's voice was a whisper. "You're not free, you idiot." Shaw spat, his aristocratic composure finally breaking. "You're mine. I built you. I saved you from a rope you deserved." "But the witness? You said he came forward." "I paid him to come forward, just like I paid the others to lie in the first place. I needed a loyal dog, Luke, one with teeth, and I found you. Now are you going to be a good dog, or do I have to put you down with the girl, fiend? Her." Shaw spun on his heel and strode back to the house. Eliza was shaking so hard, she thought the hay would rustle. She was going to die here. She heard a heavy, staggered step. The stable door creaked open. Luke Harding stepped inside, his massive frame blocking the moonlight. He stood just inside the door, his back to her, not moving. He looked like a man who had just been shot. His shoulders were slumped. He knew she was in there. He was a tracker. He was an enforcer. He could probably smell her fear. She waited to be dragged out. She waited for the gunshot. He lied, Luke whispered to the darkness. It was a broken sound, the rumble of an avalanche starting. My life, a lie. He turned, and his pale grey eyes, so accustomed to the dark, found her instantly. He saw her burrowed in the hay, the papers clutched in her hand. Eliza didn't scream. She just met his gaze, her eyes streaming with tears. He walked toward her, each step a heavy, final sound. He stopped right in front of her. He was so close, she could feel the heat radiating from him. He looked at the papers she held. "Is it true?" he asked. His voice was raw. She just nodded, unable to speak. She held the letters out to him, her hand trembling. He took them. He didn't read them. He already knew. He crushed them in his giant fist. "He wants me to kill you," Luke said, his voice flat. "I know," Eliza whispered. He had me ruin the Millers. He made me a monster." You let him?" Eliza whispered, her courage returning in a tiny, defiant spark. You begged, "Don't come inside me," she said, throwing his own words back at him in a new context. "That's what your conscience has said. But you couldn't stop." His head snapped up. Her words, a bizarre echo of her own plea, hit him harder than a bullet. He saw it. The parallel. Her begging him not to defile her home. Him, his own soul, begging him not to defile itself. And he had failed. He sank to his knees in the hay. The giant, the Goliath. He knelt before her, his head bowed. He was weeping. Not loud, but his whole body shook with silent, agonizing sobs. Eliza, seeing this broken Leviathan, felt her fear evaporate, replaced by a wave of pity so profound it made her dizzy. She reached out a hesitant hand and placed it on his shaking shoulder. "It's not too late, Luke," she said, using his real name for the first time. "It's not too late to be the man God intended you to be, not the man he made." Luke raised his head. His face was a ruin of grief and a new, terrifying rage, a rage that was for the first time aimed in the right direction. "He won't just let us go," Luke said, his voice thick. "He'll kill you. He'll kill your father. He'll kill the deputy. He'll burn that church to the ground." "Then we have to stop him," Eliza said. "No," Luke said, standing up. He seemed to grow even larger in the darkness. "I have to stop him. He looked at her. "You saved me, little preacher girl. You did what I couldn't. You saved my soul." He pulled his revolver from its holster, a massive, custom-made weapon. He checked the cylinders. "Get on my horse," he commanded. "What? What are you going to do?" "I'm going to give that legal foreclosure back to its owner." He grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet. "Ride to the church. Bar the door. Tell Ben Carter to get his rifle. Shaw and his men will be coming. I'm going to buy you some time. You're going to fight them alone." "I've been alone my whole life," Luke said. He led her to the stallion. "This is the first time. I'm not." He lifted her onto the saddle as if she weighed nothing. "Luke, don't!" she pleaded. "Come with me, go!" He roared, slapping the stallion's flank. "Go and Eliza. Tell your father. God does abide a thief. Sometimes he's the only one who can get the job done." The horse bolted, carrying Eliza into the night back toward Redemption Creek. Behind her, she heard a single gunshot, followed by a roar of rage that was not human, but not animal. It was the sound of a man unleashed. Eliza rode Beelzebub with a desperation she'd never known. The stallion, sensing the urgency, flew over the dark landscape. She arrived at the church to find Ben and her father, pacing frantically behind the barricaded doors. "Eliza! My God!" Ben cried, pulling the heavy beam away to let her in. "He's coming!" she yelled, stumbling inside. "Sure, he knows everything. He sent men to kill me, but Luke is fighting them." "Harding." Ben stared, uncomprehending. "He's fighting Shaw." It was all a lie. Ben Shaw framed him. He owned him. I have the proof. She was frantic, out of breath. "Luke, he's buying us time. He's alone against all of them." Preacher Adam Parsons looked at his daughter, then at the altar. The fear was gone from his face, replaced by a deep, profound shame, and then finally by the resolve he had lacked for years. "Ben," Adam said, his voice clear and strong for the first time, "give me the rifle you have stored in the vestry." "Father," Eliza gasped. "Eliza." Adam said, "You were right. I have been a coward. I hid behind this altar while the devil took my town. No more." He turned to Ben. "Deputy, you are the law. I am a man of God. And that man out there, Luke Harding, is a sinner seeking redemption. We will not let him seek it alone." At that moment, the church bell high above them began to toll. Bong, bong, bong. It wasn't a call to prayer. It was an alarm. "Who's doing that?" Ben asked. Eliza looked up. "I don't know." The doors of the saloon burst open. The prospectors, the saloon girls, the old men who had done nothing but watch, they were emerging. The sound of the bell, a sound they hadn't heard in earnest for months, had woken them. And then they heard the riders. Conrad Shaw and his 4 remaining men. Eliza realized Luke must have taken out at least one at the ranch, crested the small hill into town. They rode not as enforcers, but as a war party. But then, from the other end of town, came a single rider. Luke Harding. He was slumped over the saddle, and his shirt was dark with blood. But he was riding. He pulled his horse to a stop in the middle of the street, halfway between Shaw's men and the church. He was a giant silhouetted against the rising moon, a lone defender. "Harding!" Shaw bellowed, his voice dripping with venom. "You traitorous dog, I should have let you hang." Luke raised his head. "You did," he called out, his voice hoarse but carrying. "You hung me 8 years ago, Shaw. Tonight, I'm cutting the rope." He drew his massive revolver. "Kill him!" Shaw screamed to his men. "Kill them all! Burn the church!" The men charged. "Now, Ben!" Preacher Adam roared. The church doors flew open. Ben Carter stepped out, his rifle to his shoulder. He fired, and one of Shaw's men tumbled from his saddle. Adam Parsons stood on the church steps, holding not a rifle, but his large family Bible. "Hold, you sons of vipers! You will not defile this house." The townsfolk, seeing the preacher's courage, seeing the deputies stand, and seeing the wounded giant fighting in their street, finally found their own. The prospectors pulled pistols. The bartender, Pete, emerged with a shotgun. It was chaos. Gunfire erupted across the main street of Redemption Creek. Eliza, her heart in her throat, watched Luke. He was a force of nature. He'd slid off his horse, using it for cover. He fired twice, and 2 more of Shaw's men went down. He was a master, but he was wounded, and he was outnumbered. Shaw, seeing his men fall, pulled his own pistol and aimed, not at Luke, but at Eliza, standing silhouetted in the church doorway. "No!" Luke roared. He saw the gun, saw Shaw's intent. Luke abandoned his cover, charging directly at Shaw, his own gun empty. He was going to tackle him to take the bullet himself. Shaw fired. Luke grunted the shot, hitting him square in the chest, but his momentum carried him forward. He didn't stop. He slammed into Shaw's horse, his giant hands grabbing the Baron by the coat and dragging him from the saddle. They both crashed to the ground. Silence fell. The gunfire stopped. All eyes were on the 2 men in the dust. Conrad Shaw, his fine clothes ruined, scrambled for his gun. But Luke Harding was on top of him. He wasn't moving to shoot. He was just holding him, pinning him. His blood was pouring onto Shaw's white shirt. "It's over, Shaw." Luke breathed the words, a bloody gurgle. Shaw, trapped beneath the dying giant, screamed in terror and rage. Ben Carter Preacher, Adam and Eliza ran into the street. Ben kicked Shaw's gun away and hauled the sputtering Baron to his feet. Eliza fell to her knees beside Luke. "Luke! Luke!" she cried, taking his hand. He turned his head. His pale grey eyes found hers. The emptiness was gone. The pain was gone. There was only peace. "Did I?" he whispered. "Did I stop?" "You stopped Luke," Eliza wept, clutching his hand. "You stopped him. You saved us. You're saved." A faint smile touched his lips. He looked up at the church, at her father, at the townsfolk now surrounding them, armed and ready. "Redemption," he whispered. And then the giant cowboy was still. The reckoning was over. With the letters Eliza had taken and the testimony of the entire town, Conrad Shaw was arrested by Deputy Ben Carter. The territorial marshals, finally called in to a town that would speak, took him away in irons. The water rights were returned to the valley. And as if on cue the next morning, for the first time in 2 years, the sky opened up and the rain began to fall. The story of Redemption Creek, of Eliza Parsons, and of Luke Goliath. Harding isn't just a tale of the Old West. It's a story about what happens when good people are pushed too far, and when one person's courage can awaken the soul of a town. It reminds us that the biggest monsters aren't always the ones who look the part. Sometimes they wear fine suits and hide behind legal contracts. And it shows us that redemption is possible for anyone right up until their very last breath. The town buried Luke Harding on the hill overlooking the church. His grave marker, carved by Preacher Adam himself, didn't say Goliath. It just said Luke Harding, a man who stopped. If you were moved by Eliza's stand and Luke's final sacrifice, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a story of courage, and be sure to subscribe for more stories of karma, justice, and the battles that define us. Let us know in the comments what you think. Was Luke a hero or a villain who found one good moment? We'll see you in the next story.